Inflation in Latin America's largest economies is the highest it's been in 15 years. This, of course, after the shocks from the pandemic, but also the Russia-Ukraine war. And central banks in the region have been forced to tighten aggressively in response. Let's discuss the region's economic prospects with the president of the Inter-American Development Bank, Mauricio Claver-Carone. Mauricio, it's great to have you with us here in Panama City.
No better place to be.
Good to actually meet you in person.
In person? I don't feel like I've known you forever.
Right?
My pleasure. Great to see you.
Talk a little bit about the Latin American economy because, of course, as I mentioned, inflation is a big problem and central banks are tightening really, really fast at the moment. What is the growth outlook in this region and where do you see growth coming from?
Yeah, look, in regards to inflation, I think that merit needs to be due because sometimes the region doesn't get the credit it deserves. And we've actually seen, as opposed to 2008, 2009 with the financial crisis, the region's central banks have been ahead of the curve. So actually, you see the Fed has actually been kind of gradual. Meanwhile, the central banks in the region have been ahead of the curve. So you see Brazil, you see the president there, Campos, has been already moving ahead of the curve. Chile, Colombia, Mexico, DR, small countries. Then you have countries obviously like Panama and Ecuador that are dollarized and have a benefit in that regards. So they learned the lesson not to get caught up in the tail end of these interest rate rises. And look, I don't think there's an economist that would argue that the Brazilian currency is undervalued right now. It is because they moved ahead of the curve. And so I think that those lessons learned are good news. Now, in regards to growth, I think there's a great opportunity here. Like last year, everyone said the growth in the region was going to be 2-3%. And us here at the IDB, we said, no, we're going to break forecasts. And guess what? We worked with the region, and the growth across the region was 7%. Here in Panama, it was 15%. This year, again, they're saying, hey, 2-3%. But guess what? Here in Panama, you're going to have like 7% growth, hopefully 5% over the next 3-4 years. There's great momentum, particularly with the shutdown of the supply chains in Asia, with the war in Ukraine, which unfortunately, for all the wrong reasons, but is really creating an opportunity for the region to shine, for investors to recalibrate risk. So I think this is a golden era for Latin America and the Caribbean.
So what's the outlook right now for this year?
The outlook for this year is 2-3%. But guess what? That was the outlook looked at last year, and they were horribly wrong.
Is Latin America able to really take advantage of the supply chain disruptions that we've seen and actually try to move that to nearshoring in better terms with the U.S.?
Yeah. Well, look. We've been walking the walk since day one. Since my first day as president of the IDB, we're the only institution in the world that's been financing nearshoring. And last year, we did $4 billion in financing for nearshoring, helping countries in the region with their logistics and financing companies moving from China and elsewhere in Asia to Latin America and the Caribbean. So it's real. There's not a company I talked to. McKinsey did a study last year that 90% of CEOs said they want to regionalize. We're seeing a very realistic move from globalization to regionalization. And that's a huge opportunity for Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, the years or decades, I would say, of lack of investment in infrastructure, that's coming to bear. And at the end of the day, transportation costs in Latin America and the Caribbean are 60% higher than in Asia. But the risk calculation is wholly different than it was because of the shutdowns in Asia, because of the war, Russia's war in the Ukraine. So there's an opportunity here.
Is the U.S. looking at that opportunity and taking advantage of it? Because we haven't necessarily seen a clear sort of vision and framework for the Latin American economy and how Washington really approaches these nations. It's been over a year from the Biden administration.
I can't speak for the United States government, but I can speak for the Inter-American Development Bank, and I can speak for being as the first American to head up the Inter-American Development Bank. We had a record year in private sector mobilization this year in the IDB, and guess what? It was almost all American companies. People said we couldn't do it without the Chinese. Guess what? That record private sector mobilization by the IDB, over $3 billion, that we did actually a total package of $24.5 billion altogether. Guess what? It was without a single Chinese yuan. Because what happened, U.S. investors, stakeholders see that opportunity. We're working with them. We created a whole new model for IDB Invest, our private sector arm 2.0, which we're originating, we're de-risking so that we can move more money, and then we're distributing portfolios. So that opportunity exists. Investors are interested, and we're taking advantage. So
what are you expecting to do in terms of loans this year? You said more than $20 billion last year. What's the outlook for this year?
I'm the first president of the IDB to do more than $20 billion in that regards. And I ran by saying we're going to bring from 40 cents on the dollar to from our balance sheet to mobilize 40 cents. It was 40 cents that we used to mobilize. I said we're going to bring it dollar to dollar. We did that. We did 23.5, almost actually $24.5 billion. $25 billion is going to be the new normal. Maybe $30 billion is going to be the more normal. And private sector is going to be the heart of that. We're creating this new model. We're the first international financial institution to create a full mobilization bank in the private sector, and we're going to make it happen.
Is that going to be in logistics, as you talked about earlier as well?
across the board. Services, manufacturing, we're seeing the opportunities across the board. Hey, look, and it's not just about China. You know, people say, hey, is this nearshoring an anti-China thing? I said, no, it's a pro-Latin America and the Caribbean thing. I don't want a single company to look at China before it looks at any country in Latin America and the Caribbean. I don't want any company to look for services in India before it looks at the Caribbean. You know, Microsoft could employ half of Jamaica if it wanted to in that regard. Look how Intel has transformed our neighbor here in Costa Rica. These are great opportunities. These are very real. And for the first time in 30 years, you have the rhetoric matching the reality. For the last 30 years, investors were looking at China while talking all the free trade area of the Americas, et cetera. For the first time, the political rhetoric matches the corporate reality, and I think...
Do you really, though, in the Summit of the Americas, what sort of concrete action will we see there? Because we have talked about perhaps a more broad trade framework for Latin America, at least from the U.S. We really haven't seen that. Are we going to see that this time around?
Well, look, the Summit of the Americas, I'm personally, when I was previously in the U.S. government, I led the effort to bring the Summit of the Americas to the United States, and I'm very personally invested in that it had be successful, and we're doing everything we can to help the Biden administration have it be a successful summit. But these summits are political, and at the end of the day, they become very politicized, and the economics really take a back seat. We're doing the economics day by day, every day of our work in this regard. So we've been doing this since the first day of our administration. That's where we had record-breaking year. That's where we're mobilizing the private sector into the region like never been seen before, and we're taking advantage of these opportunities. But the region itself also has to have good policy of integration. You know, integration has been more of an obstacle, believe it or not, than it has been a benefit to the region. You know, 60% of all trade in Europe is interregional. 50% in Europe, only 15% in Latin America because it's too complicated. We lose $20 billion a year because of it.
15 seconds. Since you actually took the helm at the IDB, has China's influence grown or fallen? Fallen
dramatically. At the end of the day, we've mobilized more private sector financing than any time in the history of the bank, and it's been because of U.S. institutional investors, and that's what we're focused on.
Mauricio Claver-Carone, always good talking to you. Thank you so much. Great to see you in person. Inter-American Development Bank President here in Panama City. And of course, we have plenty more